My aunt convinced my grandfather to remove me from his will while I was caring for him. His attorney had already filed something different. My name is Nora Finch, and I was 34 the afternoon Arthur Pelham read my grandfather's will aloud in a conference room that smelled like old paper and central heating, and I heard my name exactly once. Not in the distribution, in the exclusion clause. It is the wish of the testator that his granddaughter Nora Finch receive no portion of this estate, as her needs have been otherwise addressed. Her needs have been otherwise addressed. I sat very still while Arthur read those words. I had driven my grandfather to Arthur's office 14 times in 3 years. I had sat in this same waiting room while he signed documents I was not shown. I had brought him coffee from the machine in the corner and waited and driven him home and helped him up the front steps of his house and made sure his evening medications were in the right order. 14 visits. And in the will that resulted from those visits, my name appeared once, in the exclusion. I looked at the table. My Aunt Patricia sat across from me with her hands folded and her face arranged into the specific expression of a woman who already knows the contents of a document before it is read and has been waiting for the reading to confirm what she arranged. Her daughter Melissa sat beside her. Melissa would receive the house. Melissa would receive the investment accounts. Melissa would receive the vehicle and the personal property and the residuary estate. Melissa was 31 and had visited my grandfather 6 times in the 3 years I had been his primary caregiver. I know the number because I kept a visitor log. I kept a visitor log because I am an elder care coordinator, and visitor logs are standard documentation in my professional practice, and I had applied my professional standards to my grandfather's care from the first week, 6 visits in 3 years. I had been there every day. Arthur finished reading. He looked at me over his glasses. Something in his expression was not quite what I expected from a man who had just read a document that excluded me. It was not sympathy. It was the specific, careful neutrality of a man who knows something is about to change and is waiting for the correct moment to say so. He said he had some additional matters to discuss. He said he would need to speak with Nora separately. Patricia said separately. He said yes. He said it was a routine estate matter. He said it would not take long. Patricia looked at me. I looked at Arthur. He gave me nothing. I gave her nothing. The room emptied. Arthur closed the door. He sat back down. He said, "Nora, your grandfather came to see me 8 months ago. He said he came alone. He said he was very specific about what he wanted." He placed a document on the table. I looked at it, and I understood in the specific way you understand things when the architecture of a situation suddenly reveals itself completely, all at once, without ambiguity, that my grandfather had known. He had known what was coming, and he had already handled it. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever cared for someone while someone else worked against you, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My grandfather's name is Walter Finch. He is 81 years old, and he spent 60 of those years building things quietly and carefully in the specific way of men who understand that patience is the prerequisite for anything worth having. He ran a small insurance brokerage for 32 years. Not a large firm. Not a name anyone would recognize. A small office on a commercial street in a mid-sized city where he knew every client personally and where the business ran on the specific currency of reliability. People trusted Walter Finch because Walter Finch had never once given them a reason not to. He sold the business when he was 72. He invested the proceeds carefully. He maintained the house he had lived in for 40 years. A craftsman on a quiet street with a garden my grandmother had planted and that he had tended with the faithfulness of a man honoring something sacred since she died 8 years ago. He was, when I became his primary caregiver 3 years ago, a man of considerable clarity and modest physical limitation. His mind was sharp. His knees were not. His memory for recent events had begun to show the specific softness of a man in his late 70s. Not dementia, not incapacity, but the ordinary erosion of retrieval that comes with age, the moments where a word or a name took longer to arrive than it used to. He knew it was happening. He found it frustrating in the specific way of a precise man experiencing imprecision in himself. He had said to me once over coffee that the most frightening thing about getting older was not the body. He said the body he had made his peace with. He said the frightening thing was the possibility that someone might use a slow moment against him, that someone might catch him on a day when the retrieval was slower and a signature was easier to produce than a question. I said I would not let that happen. He said, I know you won't. He said, that is why you are here. He was right that I was there. He was right that I would not let it happen. What neither of us had accounted for was that the person who would try was his own daughter. My Aunt Patricia is my grandfather's younger child. My mother was the older. My mother died when I was 26, a car accident on a February morning that remains the specific dividing line of my life, before and after. After my mother died, I became the family member closest to Walter, not by design, by the specific gravity of grief and proximity. I lived 40 minutes from his house. I visited on Sundays. I called on Thursdays. I brought groceries when it was easier than him going out, and I drove him to appointments when driving became unreliable, and I sat at his kitchen table and did the thing my mother had done. I kept him company in this specific way of a person who understood that company was not a luxury for an 80-year-old widower, but a structural necessity. Patricia lived 90 minutes away. She visited on holidays. She called occasionally. She sent cards on birthdays and Christmas with the regularity of a woman meeting a minimum standard she had set for herself. She was not absent in the way absence looks when it is cruel. She was present in the way presence looks when it is managed, precisely sufficient, never exceeding. When my grandfather's knees made the stairs difficult, she called me to discuss the solution. When his driving became unreliable, she called me to arrange the alternative. When his medication schedule became complex, she called me to set it up. I was the solution. Patricia was the person who identified that a solution was needed. I did not resent it. That is important. I did not resent the arrangement because my grandfather was the person I was caring for, and the caring itself was not a burden, but a choice I made from love and from the specific understanding that love, when it is real, requires presence and not just intention. I kept records because I was a professional, and professionals keep records, not because I suspected anything, not because I was building a case. Because documentation is the standard of care in my field, and I applied it to my grandfather the same way I applied it to my professional clients, the visitor log, the medication records, the appointment history. The care notes I kept in a dedicated folder, dated and specific. I kept all of it. I did not know yet how much I would need it. Patricia arrived differently in the last year of my grandfather's life. Not in the frequency of her visits, in the quality of them. She started coming more specifically, not on holidays only, but on random Tuesdays and the occasional weekend, with the specific purposefulness of a woman who had decided that presence was suddenly important and who had not explained why. She brought things, casseroles, wine, flowers for the kitchen. She took Walter to lunch. She called him more. She said she had been feeling guilty about not being more involved, and she wanted to do better. My grandfather received this with the warmth he received everything, openly, without suspicion, with the specific generosity of a man who believed people were capable of change and who never required an explanation for improvement. I received it differently, not with hostility, with the professional alertness of someone who had worked in elder care for 9 years and who understood that a sudden increase in family involvement in the final stage of a parent's life is a pattern with a range of possible explanations, and that not all of them are benign. I noted the visits in the log. I noted the dates. I continued my own visits unchanged. I said nothing to my grandfather about my observations. Some things you watch without commenting until the watching has given you enough to understand. In the 8th month before my grandfather died, he made an appointment with Arthur Pelham that I did not drive him to. Patricia drove him. I know because I was at the house that Tuesday when they left, and I asked where they were going, and my grandfather said he had some papers to take care of, and Patricia was going to drive him. He said it with the slight vagueness that had become more common in that last year, not confusion, not incapacity, but the vagueness of a man who was tired and who was allowing someone else to manage the logistics, and who did not feel the need to detail the specifics to everyone. I said, okay. I said I would see him Thursday. He said, good. He said, bring the good coffee. I said I always did. They left. I went to his kitchen and I made a note in the care log. WF transported to appointment by Patricia Hale. Destination unknown. Date and time. That was the entry. I did not investigate further. I trusted my grandfather. That was the right instinct. What I did not yet know was that my grandfather had made that appointment specifically and deliberately, and that what he had asked Arthur to prepare in that office was not what Patricia believed she had arranged. I want to tell you about the last 8 months of my grandfather's life, because they were not defined by the will. They were defined by the mornings. He woke early. Earlier than he used to, in the way of very old men who have stopped needing as much sleep as they once did, and who use the extra hours for the kind of thinking that daylight interrupts. I started coming earlier, 6:30 some mornings. I would arrive, and he would already be at the kitchen table with coffee and the crossword and the specific contentment of a man who had made his peace with where he was. We talked about everything in those early mornings. His business, my grandmother, my mother, the specific texture of a life built carefully over 80 years. He told me things in those mornings that I had not known. How he had almost not bought the house on the quiet street. How my grandmother had convinced him by standing in the empty living room with the afternoon light coming through the west window and saying, "This is where it happens." How the brokerage almost failed in year 7 and he had gone home on a Friday, certain he was done, and my grandmother had sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "What is the next right thing?" And he had known the answer and done it. How he had watched my mother become the person she became, and had felt the specific pride of a man who had done something right without being able to say exactly what. How he had watched me after she died, and had made a decision he was not going to tell me about yet. That last one he said once, in passing, on a Thursday morning with his coffee going cold. He said, "I have been taking care of something." He said he wanted me to know he had been thinking carefully about things and taking care of something. I said, "Okay." He said, "I do not want you to worry." I said I was not worried. He said, "Good." He said, "Drink your coffee." I drank my coffee. I wrote it in the care log. WF states he has been taking care of something. Appears settled and specific. No further detail provided. I did not understand the entry until Arthur placed the document on the table. The will change happened 4 months before my grandfather died. Patricia brought him to a different attorney, not Arthur, a different firm, a man named Garrett, whose name I recognized from the wrong side of 2 professional cases I had worked. A man who drafted documents quickly and asked fewer questions than he should, and whose practice had a specific reputation in the elder law community that was not a good one. I did not know about the appointment. I did not know about the new attorney. I did not know about the will change until the reading. What I knew was that in the last 4 months my grandfather was quieter with me, not distant, quieter. the specific quietness of a man who is carrying something he has decided to carry alone. I attributed it to the illness. His health had been declining more visibly in those last months. The energy was lower. The appetite was smaller. The crosswords took longer. I adjusted the care accordingly. I did not ask what he was carrying. I should have asked, but I did not want to add weight to a man who was already using everything he had to stay present. He died on a Monday morning in March, in his bed, with the window open and the garden visible. I was there. Patricia was there. We stood on opposite sides of the bed in the specific suspended state of two women who have just watched the same person die and who have nothing to say to each other. The funeral was the following Saturday. The will reading was the following Thursday. If you have ever cared for someone with your whole self while someone in the same family worked against you from the other side, you already know the specific weight of that Thursday conference room. Stay with me and subscribe, because what Arthur placed on the table after the room emptied is the reason this story ends the way it does. I sat in Arthur's conference room after Patricia and Melissa left. The door closed. Arthur sat down. He placed the document on the table. He said Walter came to see me 8 months ago. He said he came on a Tuesday alone. He said Patricia had brought him to another attorney a few weeks earlier, and he had signed something. He said Walter did not tell him specifically what he had signed, but he said it clearly enough that Arthur understood. He said Walter was troubled. He said he was not certain the document he had signed reflected what he actually wanted because he had been confused about some of the language, and Patricia had been present the entire time, and he had felt, and Arthur read from his own notes here, rushed. He had felt rushed. My grandfather had sat in a stranger's office and signed a document while his daughter stood over him, and he had felt rushed, and he had gone home and thought about it and called Arthur the following morning. He had asked Arthur if it was too late. Arthur had said it was not too late. He had said there were options. He had walked my grandfather through the options. My grandfather had chosen the most permanent one. He had chosen an irrevocable trust. He had established it at Arthur's office 8 months before his death, funded with his investment accounts, the largest portion of his estate, approximately $380,000, ayus, and he had named me as the sole beneficiary. He had asked Arthur to hold it until after the will reading. He had said he wanted the will to be read first. He had said he wanted Patricia to hear the will she had arranged, read aloud before she understood that the assets the will distributed were not the assets that mattered. I looked at the document, the trust, my grandfather's signature at the bottom, the same signature I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the occasional letter he wrote by hand because he believed handwritten letters were a form of respect. I looked at the date, 8 months before his death, 7 months before the will change Patricia had arranged. He had protected me before she had moved against me. He had known she was going to move against me, and he had already handled it. I looked at Arthur. He said your grandfather was a very precise man. I said yes. He said he came to me because he trusted me. He said he had been coming to me for 20 years, and he knew I would do it correctly. I said yes. He said he also said something I want to tell you directly. He said Walter told him that you had never once in 3 years of caring for him asked for anything. He said Walter said that told him everything he needed to know about who should be trusted with what he had built. I looked at the garden through Arthur's window. It was March. The garden outside my grandfather's house would be coming up. The garden my grandmother had planted, that he had tended for 8 years since she died. I looked at Arthur. I said, what happens now? He said the trust distributes to you outside the estate. He said the will Patricia arranged can distribute what is in it. He said what is in it is the house and the vehicle and the personal property. He said the investment accounts, the $380,000, passed to the trust. He said the trust passed to me the moment my grandfather died. He said it had already passed. He said I had already received it, I just had not known yet. I said my grandfather wanted the will read first. Arthur said yes. I said he wanted Patricia to hear the will she arranged before she understood. Arthur said that is what he told me. I said that sounds like him. Arthur almost smiled. He said it very much does. I want to tell you about the family meeting. 3 days after the will reading, Arthur's office again. Patricia had requested it. She had called me on Friday with the warm, concerned voice of a woman who believed she was about to correct a misunderstanding. She said she wanted to talk about the estate. She said there had been some confusion about certain assets. She said she was sure it was an administrative error. She said she just wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly. I said I would be there. I brought my documentation folder, not Arthur's trust document. Arthur would bring that. I brought my folder. 3 years of care logs, 147 care notes, the visitor log showing Melissa's 6 visits, the medication records, the appointment history, the 14 visits to Arthur's office, my professional documentation of 3 years of primary caregiving. I brought it not because I planned to use all of it, because having it was the only kind of ready that mattered. Patricia was already in the conference room when I arrived. Melissa was beside her. A man I did not recognize sat at the end of the table with a leather portfolio, her attorney. Arthur sat across from them. Beside Arthur sat a woman I did not know who he introduced as a trust specialist from his firm. I sat beside Arthur. I placed my folder on the table. Closed. Patricia looked at it. She looked at Arthur. She said she wanted to understand the discrepancy in the estate distribution. She said the will was clear and she wanted to understand why certain assets appeared to be missing from the inventory. Arthur said the assets were not missing. He said they had passed outside the estate through a trust instrument executed 8 months before Walter's death. Patricia's attorney said he would need to review that instrument. Arthur slid a copy across the table. The attorney read it. He read it again. He made a note on his legal pad. He said to Patricia quietly, not quietly enough, he said, "This is an irrevocable trust." Patricia said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means it cannot be contested on the basis of the will." He said the trust predates the will change by 7 months. He said the assets were placed in trust before any subsequent document was executed. He said there is nothing to contest. Patricia looked at the trust document. She looked at my grandfather's signature. She said he was confused when he signed this. Arthur said he was not. He said Walter came to him specifically and independently. He said he had documented the appointment in detail at Walter's request. He said Walter's capacity at the time of signing was not in question. He placed his own documentation on the table. The appointment notes, Arthur's contemporaneous record of my grandfather's stated reasons for the trust, his stated concerns about the document he had signed at the other firm, his stated certainty about what he wanted. Patricia read the notes. Her attorney read the notes. Melissa looked at the table. Patricia said I was trying to help him. She said he was not thinking clearly in the last year. She said I was there every week. Arthur said the records show Nora was there every day. He said Walter's care logs are part of the estate file. He said they document 3 years of primary caregiving in considerable detail. I opened my folder. I did not take everything out. I took out 1 page. The visitor log. I placed it in the center of the table. I said, "This is the visitor log I kept as part of my grandfather's care documentation." I said it records every visit to the house over the past 3 years. I said it is dated and specific. I said my grandfather's name is at the top because it was his care record. Patricia's name appeared on it. Her visits were there, accurate and specific, 14 times in 3 years. Melissa's name appeared 6 times. My name appeared every day, every single day for 3 years. The room was very quiet. Patricia looked at the visitor log. She looked at Melissa. Melissa was looking at the table. Patricia looked at me. She said, "You kept a log." I said, "I keep logs." I said, "It is professional standard in elder care." I said, "I applied the same standards to my grandfather that I apply to my professional clients." She said, "You were building a case." I said, "I was doing my job." I said, "The case built itself." Patricia's attorney said one more thing. He said, "Undue influence." He said Patricia might have grounds to argue that I had exerted undue influence over my grandfather during the period of his care. He said my daily presence and professional role created a dynamic that Arthur said he would like to stop him there. He said Walter had specifically anticipated this argument. He said Walter had asked Arthur to prepare a letter at the time of the trust signing. He placed the letter on the table. My grandfather's handwriting. 4 paragraphs. In the first, he stated that he had established the trust of his own free will without suggestion or pressure from his granddaughter Nora Finch. In the second, he stated that Nora had never once asked him for anything in 3 years of daily care. In the third, he stated that the decision to establish the trust was made specifically because of his concern about influence being exerted by others. He did not name Patricia. He did not need to. He said by others. In the 4th paragraph, he said he trusted Arthur to ensure the document reached the right people at the right time. He said he was confident it would. He said his granddaughter had always kept excellent records, and he expected the record would be sufficient. The room was very still. I looked at my grandfather's handwriting on the table. 4 paragraphs, written 8 months before his death. In the careful, deliberate hand of a man who had spent his life building things precisely, and who had applied that same precision to protecting the person he trusted most. Patricia's attorney closed his portfolio. He said to Patricia quietly that there was nothing further to pursue. She looked at the letter. She looked at the visitor log. She looked at me. She said Walter always did think ahead. I said yes. She said he always was more careful than people gave him credit for. I said yes. She said I should have known. I said yes. She said it once more. Not to me, to herself. To the letter on the table, to my grandfather's handwriting. She said I should have known. Then she stood up. Melissa stood with her. Her attorney stood. They walked out. The door closed. Arthur looked at me. He said, "Your grandfather said you would handle it quietly." I said, "He knows me well." He said, "Knew." The correction landed softly. I said, "Yes." I said, "Knew." He said, "The trust will transfer within 10 business days." I said, "Thank you, Arthur." He said he was glad Walter had come to him. I said, "So am I." He said he was a good man. I said, "Yes." I said he was the best man I knew. Arthur nodded. He gathered his papers. He said, "Go home, Nora." He said, "You have been carrying a great deal." I said, "Yes." I said, "I have." He said, "It is all right to put it down now." The trust transferred in 9 business days, $380,000. Every dollar my grandfather had saved over 60 years of careful building, passed to me outside the estate, outside the will Patricia had arranged, outside the document my grandfather had felt rushed to sign in a stranger's office while his daughter stood over him, into the trust he had established 8 months earlier in the office of a man he had trusted for 20 years, clean, documented, permanent. Patricia did not contest it. I think she understood, sitting in that conference room looking at her father's handwriting, that contesting it would require arguing against a letter her father had written specifically in anticipation of the contest, against a visitor log that recorded 3 years of her absence and my presence, against an attorney's contemporaneous notes from an appointment her father had attended alone, against a man who had died having done everything correctly. She did not contest it. The house passed to Melissa, the vehicle passed to Melissa, the personal property passed to Melissa. I had no objection. I had never wanted the house. I had sat in it every day for 3 years because my grandfather needed someone in it every day. What I wanted was what he had decided I would have. what he had decided 8 months before she moved against me, what he had already filed before she convinced him to sign something different. I want to tell you about the garden. Patricia had the house. She had the right to do what she chose with it. She chose to sell it. I understood. A 90-minute house that held complicated memories was not a house she wanted to maintain. Before it sold, I asked if I could spend an afternoon in the garden. She said yes. I went on a Saturday in April. The perennials were up. My grandmother had planted them 40 years ago, and my grandfather had tended them for 8 years after she died, and they came up every April without being asked, because some things establish themselves so thoroughly that they persist without tending. I sat on the bench my grandfather had put in the corner of the garden. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the Thursday mornings, the crosswords, the coffee going cold, the conversations about my grandmother and my mother, and the specific texture of a life built carefully. I had been taking care of something. He had said it once. I do not want you to worry. He had known. He had known Patricia was going to move against me, and he had already moved first. He had sat in Arthur's office with his careful handwriting and his 20-year trust and his 4-paragraph letter, and he had protected me the way he protected everything. Precisely, permanently, without announcement. I sat in the garden until the afternoon light changed. Then I went home. I took one thing from the house before it sold. Not anything valuable. Not anything Patricia would have noticed was gone. The crossword puzzle book from the kitchen table, the one he had been working through in the last year. Every puzzle filled in his handwriting. Some of the later ones had corrections in pencil where the retrieval had been slower. Some of the earlier ones were perfect. I keep it in my desk drawer. I open it sometimes on Thursday mornings, the specific morning of our specific habit. I read the filled-in squares, his handwriting, precise even when the retrieval was slower, careful even when the words took longer to come. He had been precise until the end. He had been precise about the trust. He had been precise about the letter. He had been precise about asking Arthur to wait. I had been taking care of something. He had. He always had. Patricia called me once, 6 months after the trust transferred. She said she wanted to say something. I said, go ahead. She said she had told herself she was helping him. She said she had told herself he needed someone to manage his affairs, and that Nora was getting too involved, and that the estate should stay in the direct family line. She said she had told herself all of that, and she had believed it. She said she understood now that what she had actually been doing was positioning. She said she was sorry. She said it plainly. No warmth deployed, no agenda underneath, just the word and what it meant. I sat with it. I said, I believe you. She said, I know you do not have to. I said, I know. I said, I choose to. She said, thank you. She said, he loved you very much. I said, I know. I said, I loved him. She said, I know that too. I said, now. She said, yes. She said, now I know that. She said, I should have known sooner. I said, yes. I said, you should have. She said, is there anything left to say? I thought about it. I said, no. I said, I think that is all of it. She said, okay. She said, take care of yourself, Nora. I said, you too, Patricia. She hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I opened the crossword book. Thursday morning, his handwriting. I found a puzzle he had not finished. 7 across, 6 letters. The clue was, what remains after everything else is gone? He had left it blank. I picked up a pencil. I wrote the answer. Legacy. That is my story. 3 years of daily care, 8 months of a grandfather's quiet preparation, 1 conference room, and a letter written in careful handwriting by a man who knew exactly what was coming and had already handled it. If you are caring for someone right now while someone else in the same family is working against you, keep the logs, keep the records, keep every dated note in every care folder. not because you are building a case, because you are a professional doing professional work, and because the records will speak when the time comes and you will not need to raise your voice. And if the person you are caring for is still here, tell them what they mean to you. Not because they need to hear it to protect you, because they deserve to hear it. My grandfather knew I loved him. He wrote it in a letter so it would be on the record. I am glad he did. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.